All right, we've got the new Mizuno Pro irons in the studio today, the 241, 243, and 245. I'm going to talk about the changes they made and why I am such a fan of what they did. Let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a wonderful day. So we have the new Mizuno Pro lineup here. This is going to be my first time hitting them in the studio. But before I go through that, I want to just do a quick rundown of what these new irons are about and maybe how they are different from the previous model, that being the 221, 223, 225 irons. Now this 241 really, of the three new models, this one is probably the most similar to the old 221 model. When you look at the overall dimensions of the club, they are very similar. You're not going to notice much in the way of differences, but there are a few differences that you will most likely pick up on pretty quickly, cosmetically at least. The first one being, well, this muscle back right here. If you look at the old muscle, it was much longer, more spread across the back of the head, whereas this new muscle is much more sort of flexed, let's call it, right? The old muscle kind of looked like this, the new one looks more like that. It's a much more condensed, packed in muscle right there in the center. That's going to go across all three of the new clubs. You're going to notice that. It's supposed to give you better feel, better sound. So that's what's going on there. The second difference, well, they decided to change the paint fill. The previous model, they had the paint fill in black, and now they've changed it, well, to white. Third difference, and this one I really like, is they've gone away finally from the chrome finish on that blade. It is hard to find a pure chromed iron. Most people are looking for or prefer that kind of dulled down satin finish. So now with the 241, they have actually gone with that satin finish in the 241, along with the 243 and 245, but specifically this one they have changed. Now the last difference with the new model, and this again goes through all three of the new models, is they've increased the bounce on all of these irons. The bounce being this right here, this angle right here, they've actually increased just a little bit. I'm a huge fan of that idea because quite honestly, I think bounce is pretty much everyone's friend. Everyone could use a little more forgiveness, and that's what bounce does. And the fact of the matter is, when you have a sole this narrow, this thin, low bounce is really doing nobody any good because that thing is just going to want to dig, dig, dig if you hit down on the ball. So especially when you've got this narrow of a sole, having more bounce to sort of balance that out is just a good idea. All right, now the 243 carries over a few of those things from the 241 that we already talked about, one being they've changed the paint fill color. Also, again, notice that muscle back is much more condensed. But beyond that, the 243, you can actually look at, when you compare it to the old model, the 223, and see they have changed the overall shape of it a little bit. It's an interesting golf club because when you just look at the back of it, it almost looks thicker. It almost looks like a bigger cavity back. But I think that's really more of an artifact of how this muscle is set here in the center and kind of sticks out a little bit further because it's so squeezed in here. So it kind of gives it a more forgiving look when you look at the back of it. However, when you actually look at the different lines on it, the sole is actually a little bit thinner. The cavity back, when you look at, say, this cavity here on the top, is actually thinner on this new 243. And when you set it down behind the ball, again, you're going to get a more compact, a thinner looking top line, a smaller profile golf club in the new 243. Finally, we've got the 245, again, different paint fill, again, that more concentrated muscle back here, and of course the brushed finish, but again, that's a carryover from the 225, so not really a change there. But what is a change, again, much like the 243, is that this is a more compact looking head. And this one really, from every angle, is going to look more compact. Even looking at the back, it has a little smaller profile. When you look at the sole, when you look at the top line, when you look at the overall face size, the 245 is a little bit more compact, a little bit smaller, I would say probably is going to be a little more desired by lower handicappers, better golfers. But at the same time, I think a higher handicapper, you know, someone 10, 12, 14 handicap, can definitely play with this club without issue because it does still give you all of those forgiving attributes that you get in a hollow body construction. Two last things I'll say about these new clubs before we start hitting them. One, I think it's fair to say that all three of these are kind of leaning or tipping the scale a little bit more towards the player side of it versus game improvement side of it. I'm a big fan of that. I think the Mizuno Pro line has always been known as the player's side of it. And honestly, with the previous model, it got slightly confusing, a little bit murky between having these clubs in the Mizuno Pro line versus the JPX line, which historically is the more forgiving line. But with those clubs, with the 225 and even the 223, it was kind of hard to figure out where the Mizuno Pro line was versus the JPX when you had the Forged and the Tour, and they kind of would kind of jumble up with each other. I think with this lineup now, with the new profile, with the new shape of these heads, it really makes more sense. It puts the Mizuno Pro line really as more of the player style iron, and it puts the JPX line minus the Tour, which again is still kind of it's a bit of an outlier, right, because it's so small. But discounting that, the rest of the lineup with the JPX Hot Metal and even the Forged, I think fall into place kind of in the more mid-handicapper to higher handicapper lineup. So I think this just works better and is just going to make more sense for golfers trying to figure out what's best. I am a big fan of them changing this 241 to that brushed finish, not only because just it's hard to find a chrome iron, honestly, out there at this point, a chrome blade, but just for the consistency, for the continuity of the lineup. I think it makes a lot of sense because now these three clubs really are perfect candidates for a blended set, whether you wanted to go 241 to 243, 243 to 245, or even go from one end to the other, 241 to 245, you can do that because they're going to look very consistent and you're not going to have a big, glaring, obvious difference in that transition point between irons. All right, looks really good, feels really good. Of course, it's a Mizuno, it feels like a Mizuno, so that kind of is a given. I do feel like maybe I noticed what they were talking about with this more condensed muscle design where it sort of elongates the feel a little bit. You know, maybe it's in my head, but I do kind of get that sensation, so it might be there. Yeah, I really like the look. I really like the sound. This is just a straight muscle back blade iron, so it is not going to be the most forgiving club. It is definitely going to move around on you a little bit more. Let's see if we can knock one down here, try and hit a little lower one. I left it open a little bit, but all right, so there's the 241. Very traditional lofts, be aware. These are, we're talking 34 degrees on this 7-iron, pitching wedge at 46. So very traditional blade or player style lofts on this set. All right, next the 243, and being completely honest with myself, that 241 is really not the club for me. I don't need that sort of setup. This would be more of what I would be thinking about. This 243, a little bit more forgiving. So we'll see what happens here. Lofts on these are going to be a couple degrees stronger than the 241. So we're talking about, in this case, the 7-iron is sitting at 32 degrees. So we would expect a little more distance out of it because of that. Felt pretty good to start. I really like the feel of this club. This thing feels really good. Honestly feels just like, for me at least, the really solid ones I hit with the 241. It just has that very good thump, heavy, thick feeling sound to it. And yeah, I really like this. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good right there. Yeah, so I'll be completely honest. In the previous sets, the previous model, 221, 223, 225, the 223 was my least favorite of the three. It was never the one I felt like I could get really comfortable with. Didn't love the feel as much versus the 221 and the 225. This guy, I really like. This 243 feels really, really good, looks really good, just a really solid golf club. Let's try and knock one down with this guy now. Oh yeah, that pretty much is exactly what I wanted, I think. Yeah, down to 16.1. Okay, last up, 245. Now this one in the previous model, in the 225, was really the club I felt like fit the greatest number of golfers, right? I put golfers in this club who were scratch golfers. I put golfers in this club who were, 10, 12, 14 handicaps. It had the widest range, I think, of golfers who could really enjoy it. So I'll be interested to see what this guy does in the new model. Again, this is a little bit smaller profile, so maybe just a touch less forgiving than the previous version. Again, the lofts are going to drop a little bit harder on these, so we're now talking, we went from 34 to 32 in the 243, and we are now down to 31 with the 7-iron. Pitching wedge in this model down to 43, so definitely more of that player distance style lofts. Still looks really good, really clean, really compact. I missed that one a little bit, but that'll be a good indication of how forgiving it is. There's definitely a little high toe. Launch was a little lower. Of course, the launch is also going to be lower because of the loft. That was a little better. That was a good one right there. Just had a tiny tail on it. You can definitely see the height is a little bit less with this. The launch angle is a little bit lower with these clubs. Again, the lofts are lower, the launch is going to be lower. That's just how it works. I have a feeling, I haven't been watching the spin, but I'm pretty certain that the backspin's also going to be lower. And not a surprise, the distance is going to be a little bit longer, we're going to probably see overall. That was hit really nicely. Yeah, these guys are getting out there pretty good. It does jump off the face a little bit more here because of that loft. It feels a little more like a hollow body iron, whereas I think the 241 and the 243 felt really, really, really similar. This one does feel a little bit more like a hollow body iron. Not in a bad way, but it does have a little bit different response to it. All right, let's knock one down, see if we can hit it even lower than we've already hitting it. It was kind of bottom grooved, but definitely low. Here's the final numbers. Nothing overly surprising based on the lofts. The 241 with the highest loft is going to launch higher. It's going to have more spin. it's going to be a little shorter. The 243 spun a little bit less. Actually, my launch angle was basically the same, but I think that's really just because I hit it really solidly, so those balls just went a little bit higher naturally. That being said, I was still able to flight it down when I wanted to, so all that was really good, but it did go a little further. And then, of course, the 245, that is definitely more of that player's distance style setup with those lofts. So again, lower launch, lower spin, you're going to see a little more rollout and a little longer overall shots. Other thing to be aware of here, again, already said the 241 comes in a 3-through pitching wedge. The 243 is offered in a 4-through gap wedge. And the most interesting setup probably is the 245, because not only do they have the 4-through gap wedge setup, but they also offer it in a 3-iron and a 16.5-degree 2-iron. So if you're looking for a driving iron, a smaller, more compact style tee-off club, that 245 2-iron might be an interesting experiment. We might have to get one in here and try that out as well. But overall, really like all three of these clubs. I really like what Mizuno did with the new Mizuno Pro lineup. I like how they have just a more consistent look to them so that you can kind of blend them together. And I also like the overall sort of move to make them a little bit more compact, a little bit more player-oriented again, so that it's a little clearer between the Mizuno Pro line overall and the JPX line overall. Again, minus that JPX Tour, which is an outlier. But I think the Mizuno Pro being a little bit more low handicapper and the JPX lineup being a little more mid to higher handicapper, that just makes more sense. For me personally, if I was going to tell you to check out just one of these clubs, it's definitely the 243. That was the one biggest surprise for me, the one I really liked the most. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, go down below, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos, and I will see you next time. Bye.